Watch more programs like this on cable and stream with PCN Select. Subscribe at PCNTV.com.
Chris Deluzio is a Democrat running for Congressional District 17. Why are you running for this office?
I love that question. For me, it's an easy one. I'm running for Congress here in Western Pennsylvania because I love this country. I grew up here in the 17th District, and like a lot of veterans of my vintage and age, I was motivated by the 9/11 attacks to go serve. It happened my senior year of high school, and I went off to the Naval Academy from there and spent several years as an officer leading Americans across deployments at sea, the tour in Iraq on the ground, and later became a lawyer fighting to protect our elections and our democracy. And I think we face big challenges in this country here in Western Pennsylvania to bring back our supply chains and our manufacturing, to give folks a shot at real economic dignity and security, and to protect our freedom, our rights, reproductive freedom, folks' ability to have a say in our election, and trust and confidence in this government of ours. And I come back to my love of country and wanting to fight here for our common good for all of us in Western Pennsylvania.
Can you talk a little bit about District 17? Where is it, and what are some of its characteristics?
Well, I'll start by reminding folks it's the best congressional district in the country here in Western Pennsylvania. The district is all of Beaver County and a good chunk of Allegheny County surrounding the city of Pittsburgh, east, north, west, and down to the south. And so it's a great district. It's a diverse one. It's got a mix of suburban, urban, rural neighborhoods and communities, and a real mix of parts of our economy and jobs. And frankly, it's a cross-section of America, and it's uniquely Pennsylvanian, I think.
Can you talk a little bit more about the economy of the district? What types of industries are there?
So we've got a pretty diverse mix of things going on in our regional economy here in the 17th and across Western Pennsylvania. Of course, we've got strong manufacturing. We're the part of the country that powered construction of skyscrapers and made the steel. We still have strong manufacturing. We have a strong energy economy here around gas, renewables, nuclear, you name it. We have lots of eds and meds, as they say, education, medical. There are tech jobs around here in this district. And of course, lots of jobs around healthcare. There are service jobs. It really is a very diverse economic landscape here in Western Pennsylvania. And I think we have one of the strongest union workforce in the country from our legacy of fighting for a better, stronger union way of life for folks here in Pennsylvania.
Now, you talked a little bit about your background. Tell us about the Naval Academy. What was that experience like for you?
I loved it. It was hard. It was difficult. It shaped me into, I think, the officer I became, preparing to lead Americans at sea in Iraq in my time as an officer. Annapolis is a great place you make great bonds, but you also are focused every day beyond just your academics. You're focused on preparing to lead, and that's really what those 4 years were about. They test you. They put you through the ringer. End of the day, we graduate great officers in the Marine Corps and the Navy, and I'm proud that I'm a graduate of the Naval Academy. It's really shaped who I am, and the values I learned there, I mention a lot. Shipmate, self. You put the mission first. You put others before you, and it's really foundational to who I am, not just as a candidate, but who I hope to be as a member of Congress.
Once you were commissioned, what kind of an officer were you? What was your career field?
I was a surface officer in the Navy, so I had a variety of jobs on a warship. I served on a destroyer, led sailors in a bunch of different tasks, from firefighting to things in engineering, leading and being in charge on the bridge of the ship. But then I also later did a tour with Army Civil Affairs on the ground in Iraq with mostly soldiers, but a few sailors as well. So I was a surface officer by training, but did work with the Army as a civil affairs officer as well.
What do civil affairs officers do?
Yeah, so civil affairs officers during my time in Iraq were really focused on a range of tasks, from supporting regular Army to supporting the State Department, Special Forces, those involved in development to navigate sensitive information gathering, intelligence, reconstruction efforts on the ground at that time in Iraq. So really an interesting and dynamic job. I was really impressed by the other Americans I served with, mostly Army personnel, who really were bringing experience they had from a range of their own lives and backgrounds to that civil affairs job, where you had to problem solve in ways you couldn't prepare for, whether it was navigating domestic Iraqi politics, navigating the American bureaucracy of State Department, military, you name it. It was a really interesting and difficult job, and the soldiers I served with really did their best and brought their best to this country to it.
What do you learn about leadership by being a naval officer?
Well, you lead Americans of every stripe, from every walk of life, from every faith, from every corner of this country. That's the part of my service that has always stuck with me, is that you really are in a total team effort. And I often talk with folks about things we would do passing the time, whether on watch, on the ship, spending time together between patrols or missions in Iraq or preparing for them. And you get to know people, again, from every walk of life in this country. And the things that united us, that we would spend our time talking about, family, friends, food, sports, you name it. And we didn't have time for division. We didn't have time to be talking about whose version of politics or whose version of patriotism was any stronger or better than anyone else. We have a saying in the Navy, we're only as strong as the weakest link in the chain. And that's really central to, I think, how we achieve the things we did in the fleet, and certainly our friends in the Army as well. That you don't have time for disunity, and you don't have time for the divisiveness we hear. And frankly, I think it surprises and shocks a lot of us who I served with to hear folks on the extreme right talk about as though their version of patriotism is something special or different than anyone else. And I think anyone who claims they have a monopoly on the flag or patriotism is lying and doing a disservice to so many who serve, not just in uniform, but serve their communities, their neighbors, this country in all the ways every single day.
Now, you became a lawyer. Where did you go to law school, and why did you choose the law?
I went to Georgetown. I was stationed in Washington, finishing up my time on active duty, and I was drawn to the law for a bunch of reasons, but fundamentally, I think it's one of the most important tools we have to do justice, to do right by people. Whatever it is you navigate as a lawyer, or whatever it is that you focus on, if you use those skills in a way that serves justice, serves fairness, serves equality, I think it's a powerful tool, it's a powerful skill set, and it's part of writing legislation and working on the bills that shape those laws. So it's a skill set I'm hoping to bring to the Congress, and I say that as someone, not just a lawyer, someone who's worked for a federal judge, who's worked on legislation, who's fought to protect democracy and voting rights as an attorney. Those are skills I think we need today as we see our democracy stressed, as we see things like and the threats around something like the January 6th insurrection not going away, as we see the Congress work in a bipartisan fashion, I think and hope, to reform something as basic as the Electoral Count Act, the law that shapes how we count the Electoral College votes, but that was stressed on January 6th. I think those skills and that background is very, very important and needed in this moment as we're facing real unique challenges to this democracy of ours.
Now, as you've been campaigning, what types of concerns are you hearing from voters?
Well, it varies across the district and who I'm speaking to, but some themes have emerged pretty consistently. I've been hearing from folks for quite a while that life is too expensive, and this anger and frustration at the corporate price gouging we're seeing in so many different parts of our lives, whether it's at the gas station, the grocery store, you name it. And so folks are fired up and eager to bring our manufacturing back, get those supply chains back here at home, and start making things here in Western Pennsylvania. I've also been hearing very consistently from Democrats, independents, Republicans, real disappointment and anger over the Supreme Court's decision to overturn Roe v. Wade, to attack reproductive freedom and tell women they don't get to make sensitive decisions, serious decisions about their health care, their families, their reproductive choices. And so I've heard and been hearing a lot about that threat and what it means here in Pennsylvania to see abortion rights under attack. And so folks are frustrated and mobilized, I think, to fight for their freedom, to fight for their rights. And I'm hearing about it pretty regularly alongside the core economic concerns where folks, I think, know we've got to be building strong union jobs to make things right here in Western Pennsylvania.
How are you going about campaigning? We've past few years with COVID, there's been a lot of virtual activity. Are you out and about, moving around your district?
I'm everywhere I can be. We're knocking doors. We're attending all the community events we can. I'm going to union halls and meetings, touring small businesses, factories, you name it. You got to meet voters where they are, and of course they're going to see it on the television and the mail, but there's nothing quite like a handshake and asking folks what's on their mind and giving them a few minutes to share their views, but also hear what I have to say and what I'm hoping to bring to representing us in the Congress.
How does your district break down on party lines? Is it mostly one party or the other, or is it an even mix?
It's slightly more Democratic than Republican. President Biden narrowly carried the district in 2020. And of course, my friend, and I'm proud to have support from Congressman Connor Lamb, who's been representing this district and still does, will through the end of the year here. And so, it's a place where Democrats have won elections and where I'm hoping to fill the big shoes left by Congressman Lamb, who's, I think, been representing us well in Washington.
Now, on your website, you say that democracy is in peril. What do you mean by that?
Well, look, I think we saw on January 6th the worst that we've seen in terms of threats to this government of ours, the Constitution I swore an oath to protect and defend. I never imagined when I looked back on what drove me to serve, the 9/11 attacks, that we would live through attacks here at home brought by Americans against our own government. But we have. And I think a stark reminder of what happened is this fact. Among the many things that happened that day, there was a vote. And there were votes in the Congress, and many members of Congress voted to throw out the presidential election votes of people here in Pennsylvania. Folks who are supporting my opponent, I'll be frank, in the Congress, were willing to throw out all of our votes in Pennsylvania because they cared more about power than they did our freedom, than they did our Constitution. And so I think those threats haven't gone away. I think we have to be on watch, on guard. We have to shore up our laws in Washington to make sure that these threats are addressed, to make sure that folks have a government that is strong and resilient. I think most people, again, whether you're Democrat or Republican, you expect candidates to disagree on policy issues. You don't expect there to be candidates who don't accept the results of elections, who are willing, because they want power, to throw out your votes. And I'll never allow that, and I'll fight every way I can to make sure people's votes are protected.
Over the past couple of years, as we've been dealing with the COVID pandemic, we've seen supply chain issues and other problems with manufacturing overseas. Do you think there needs to be a policy change to try to bring manufacturing back to the United States?
I absolutely think we need policy change, and changes, plural, around manufacturing. For decades, there have been choices, not ones that I agree with, that shipped our jobs all over the planet, that said, big corporations chasing profits, it's more important for you to find the cheapest labor than it is for you to give much of a concern to workers around here. We let these big corporations ship our factories and our jobs to right-to-work states with anti-union laws, and we let them ship them to countries like Mexico and China and all over the planet. I think it's been a mistake, and I think it's gutted many communities here in Western Pennsylvania. I think we've seen and we are experiencing the problem, the cost of living rising because we aren't making things here. And every time a country like China or anywhere else imposes COVID lockdowns, there's a ripple effect through those global supply chains that hit us right in our pocketbooks. So I'm going to fight to bring our jobs back, to end bad trade deals, to get rid of the anti-union right-to-work laws that undercut workers here in Western Pennsylvania. So we can start manufacturing things again. We can start making things here in Western Pennsylvania. I know that we have the workforce ready to do it. I know that we have the businesses ready to do it. We need policy in Washington to help them get there.
Recently, President Biden implemented a plan to eliminate some student debt. What do you think of his plan?
Look, I think it's only part of the way. If we don't address the cost of living, the cost of education, how underfunded and defunded, frankly, higher education's become in the States, we aren't going to do things that are going to address this problem going forward. And so if you look at someone who's entering, whether it's 4-year college, 2-year, looking at going into an apprenticeship in the trades, that cost of education is only going to continue to going up if we don't start investing in it. And again, I think that's key. That's the only way we're going to really bring down costs for folks. And look, sitting here in Western Pennsylvania, as I talk about reinvigorating manufacturing, our friends in the building trades are running great apprenticeship programs that are preparing our workforce for the jobs of today and tomorrow. Investing and supporting those apprenticeships has to be part of any discussion and really funding education, because it can't just be 4-year college, which we have to invest in, of course, but we have to also be making sure we've got the workforce with the tools and the training and the resources they need to make the things here that we've got to bring back home.
Now, earlier you mentioned that one of the things you were hearing about voters was concerned about abortion access after the Supreme Court decision. Can you talk about the Dobbs decision, and do you think there's a legislative solution to this if you were to be elected to Congress?
Yeah, so folks are pretty angry. The Supreme Court undid decades of precedent in overturning Roe v. Wade, saying now that there's no longer a federal constitutional right to an abortion. And I've been hearing from Republicans, independents, Democrats, men and women alike, that they don't want the states criminalizing abortion. They don't want legislators on the far right getting in the middle of a very sensitive, one of the most crucial decisions you can make around your health care, your reproductive freedom, your family. And there is federal action we can take. There's a bill in Washington that I'll support that will protect, again, under federal law, what Roe v. Wade used to protect, so that people can make these decisions on their own, consulting their family, their faith leaders, their doctors. That's who should be making these decisions, not right-wing politicians.
So I want to talk a little bit about foreign policy. On your website, you say that you want no more forever wars. What do you mean by that?
Well, I think we fought wars in this country for 20 years after 9/11 that had seemingly no end in sight, no clear mission, resolution. And I think we allowed my generation of veterans, certainly I know plenty of folks who served more deployments than most people could imagine, in Iraq, Afghanistan. And it was correct for us to wind down the 20-year adventure abroad. And so one of the things I bring to this service in Congress is knowing that those costs of war are borne, of course, by the people on the ground living there, but of course the Americans we send to fight. And there is never going to be a day when I'm a member of Congress representing Western Pennsylvania where I'll send Americans to fight if I'm not willing to look every constituent in the eye and say, you or your child should be willing to fight and die for this, if I weren't willing to send my own children to go fight. I think too often members of Congress shirk that duty. They don't take it seriously. It's a major part of this job. It's a part of the job that I'm ready to do and that I take as one of the most sacred obligations I'd have as a member of Congress.
How would you assess China as a national security threat?
I think we are in an economic, I think we are in a major geopolitical global competition with China. We have for too long been not paying attention to the fact that they are coming for our jobs. They're coming for us economically. They are stressing and pushing the limits of their power in Asia. I served at sea all over the world, but certainly and saw in my time in the Pacific their willingness to confront international rights of passage and sea lanes, challenge the free movement of vessels across international waters. For too long, we've allowed our manufacturing to go abroad to China and to take jobs from this part of the country, strong union jobs that I'm hoping to bring back. And look, I think there's real clear contrast here. The person I'm running against has made millions at a company that's been building infrastructure in China, a country who I think is our economic adversary, one that I saw up close and personal in my time in uniform. I'm not going to treat them like a trading partner. I'm going to treat them like the adversary that they are. And folks in Western Pennsylvania around here realize it's a real threat.
Do you think that in order to counter this threat from China that we need to perhaps have a bigger Navy to patrol the sea lines of communication or engage in naval diplomacy?
I think the Navy is an absolutely critical bulwark against their adventurism, certainly in the Pacific, and where they're trying to assert rights around islands, assert ownership and privileges around international waters. The Navy has a crucial role to play. I've, in my own deployments, seen how critical we are to protecting commerce and protecting international sea lanes. So the Navy has a big role to play here. And certainly if the Chinese are going to continue to make threats around Hong Kong or Taiwan, we have a key role to play in keeping regional stability and making sure that not only is democracy protected, but that we're protecting our own interests abroad and across the planet.
Now, if we shift our attention to Europe, this year, of course, we've seen Russia invade Ukraine. The Biden administration has sought to support Ukraine in a variety of ways. What do you think about President Biden's policies?
I think what we have seen around NATO allies really coming together diplomatically, militarily to support the Ukrainian people who are under siege from Russia's just indefensible invasion. I've been very heartened to see the way that NATO allies, who for years have shirked their obligations on defense spending under the treaty, putting too much of that burden on the American public, well, now are stepping up to meet their treaty obligations. And I think there's a lesson here beyond the obvious ones of Russia's militarism and their willingness to violate international law and the sovereignty of the Ukrainian people. I think we're seeing energy policy play out on a global scale, where we're seeing European friends who are walking away from the nuclear sector, who are decarbonizing and not paying attention to their reliance on Russian exports, and are now looking down the barrel of real serious economic recession or worse in the months to come. And so it's our stark reminder of how volatile these markets are and how we can't in America be relying on despots like Putin for our energy.
How important is NATO for American national security?
I think it's critical given what we're seeing in Russia and in Europe today, where we have allies who are strong economic partners, sitting right on the border of where there's fighting happening. Ukraine is not a NATO ally, but NATO allies nearby are certainly feeling the pressure and the squeeze of what might happen to them. I think for decades, the NATO alliance has been critical, but also I think, as I mentioned, our European friends for too long put too much of that burden on us as the Americans without meeting their own defense obligations. And so one of the things I will hope to bring to the Congress is a strong reminder and pressure that this is not a treaty that works when only the Americans are stepping up to meet our obligations, when only the Americans are ones with strong defense commitments. For the treaty to really go both ways, we need our friends in Europe to do the same, and I'll be pushing in the Congress to make sure they do exactly that.
What do you think, how would you assess the state of Social Security, and do you think it should be privatized?
I don't think Social Security should be privatized. I think these schemes that we're hearing on the far right are obscene. These are hard-earned benefits that folks spend their lives preparing for retirement. And to put it at the whim of the stock market or whatever right-wing privatization scheme is dangerous. We're hearing theories and proposals from Republican politicians who want to put Social Security and Medicare on the chopping block every few years or even every year to make there be a political fight over the spending that, again, these are earned benefits for folks. So I'm going to fight those tooth and nail. I think we've got to be strengthening and expanding Social Security. It's on sound footing. It could easily be on sounder footing if we didn't cap the income that folks pay into Social Security. I don't think Jeff Bezos should be paying the same amount of taxes as someone who makes $150,000 for Social Security. That's a mistake. That's a clear path to putting Social Security on even sounder fiscal footing to protect a program that is not just popular, but has eradicated poverty for seniors for decades and kept folks from being out on the streets and worse. So it's a program we have to protect. These are earned benefits for people, and I'll be protecting them in Washington.
Now, on your website, you mentioned pieces of legislation like the Freedom to Vote Act and the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. Why do you think these legislation are important?
Well, we had a Voting Rights Act on the books in this country for 50 years nearly. We used to pass with huge bipartisan majorities. President George W. Bush had signed reauthorization. This is something that used to not be controversial. Well, the Supreme Court gutted it nearly a decade ago, and I think we've seen pretty clearly what happens. It's easier to erect barriers and do things to try to suppress the vote than it's been since before the Voting Rights Act, since the mid-'60s and Jim Crow. We know there are threats to the vote and to our democracy that we're seeing across the country. Certainly in Pennsylvania, I think Doug Mastriano, who is someone who is really threatening the security of our democracy here at home, who participated in the January 6th insurrection, who has a campaign office with my opponent in Beaver County. These are real threats that we need federal action to protect against. And again, the Voting Rights Act is something that used to have Republican buy-in and somehow has now become partisan. I don't get it. I think we need it to strengthen voting rights here and bring us back to where we've been for decades after the 1960s, where we had a floor of protection for Federal Voting Rights Act. It's not for federal voting rights, excuse me. And it's not just voting rights. We need federal action, I think, to make sure we have fair maps, as we do here in Pennsylvania. My district's competitive. Most congressional seats in this country are not competitive. I'd like to see reforms around campaign finance. I don't think being a millionaire or billionaire, you should be able to bankroll your own election, as my opponent's done. I don't think we should have unlimited corporate money flying through super PACs, funding commercials and mailers and whatever else they want. I think people realize it's corrupt It undermines confidence and faith in our democracy, and I'll be fighting to strengthen our democracy against these forces.
Now, there are certainly policy differences between Democrats and Republicans, but are there other policy areas where you think you can find common ground with Republicans?
Oh, I hope so. One of the things I've committed to doing is to join a country called the Four Country Caucus. It's composed of veterans from both Democratic, Republican Party, both sides of the aisle. We commit to meet regularly, to work on legislation together. It's a shame, frankly, that there has to be a caucus for that. This ought to be the basic part of legislating. And I don't think Democrats or Republicans are magically going to agree on everything, on every core issue. But I think there are places we can work together. One place I'd hope to serve is on one of the Veterans Affairs committees. I'm a veteran myself. I'm a patient of the VA. I think we've seen Democrats and Republicans work together on good legislation to strengthen protections and care for veterans who've earned it. So that's one place I think we can really work together. I hope there are others, and I'll certainly find them where I can. It's important, I think, for people to see their legislators work together to tackle the problems that matter. And I come to this from someone who, in my life in the uniform, wearing the uniform, serving, we worked together for everything. Didn't matter your politics because we had a mission bigger than ourselves. That's my worldview. That's how I approach serving in Congress. That's how I'll take the job in Washington.
We have just about a minute left. Use that time to tell voters why they should vote for you.
Well, I hope you will support me. I'm someone who grew up here in Western Pennsylvania. I committed to serve this country when I was a 17-year-old and I raised my right hand and took the oath for the first time. It's what shapes my commitment to this region and to this country. I'll be fighting for all of us, for our economic dignity, for strong union jobs, to bring our jobs back home, to fight for reproductive freedom and protect our democracy. I think we all know Western Pennsylvania deserves a better shake, and I'll be fighting for exactly that in Washington. So I hope you'll vote for me. Thank you so much.
Chris Deluzio is a Democrat running for Congressional District 17. Thank you for speaking with me.
Thank you so much. It was a real treat.